Welcome to today's Solutions to Go session, where our topic will be supporting students with self-regulation. My name is Dr. Tim Fountain, and I will be your facilitator for this session. I am in my 25th year in public education, and I currently serve as the Director of Leadership and Learning for the CEWB-05 School District. I've spent many years as an administrator at the middle school, high school, and elementary levels, and I look forward to being your guide in today's topic. Let's start by reviewing our goals and objectives for this session. Our first objective is that we'll begin by exploring what's happening with students' emotional well-being right now. Many students are navigating complex challenges, and understanding these dynamics helps us respond with more empathy and effectiveness. Our second objective is to discuss the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on student behaviors. The pandemic has had a profound effect on students' social and emotional development, which in turn affects their behavior and interactions. Our third objective is to look at what accelerating behavior means and how to recognize it. This includes behaviors that might escalate quickly and could benefit from early intervention. And for our fourth objective, we'll explore co-regulation techniques. Co-regulation is about guiding students to develop their own self-regulation skills and is an essential part of our role as educators. These techniques will provide practical tools to help us support students in real time. Overall, by the end of this session, our aim is to have a clear understanding of why self-regulation is challenging for some students, recognize signs that may indicate a struggle, and feel confident in applying strategies that help students build these skills over time. Let's dive into each of these areas, keeping in mind how they'll equip us to better support our students in the classroom and beyond. Before we dive into today's material, let's take a moment to set a personal intention for this session. Reflecting on your intentions helps us to make the most of this learning experience and opens us up to fully engaging, even if some parts feel unfamiliar or outside our comfort zones. Let's start by considering what would help you engage meaningfully today. Maybe it's a simple reminder to yourself, such as, I give myself permission to be fully present and actively participate, even if it feels a bit awkward. And I can tell you that for me, it always feels a bit awkward to be in front of the screen. Or perhaps I'm going to set aside some distractions and make time to truly learn something new. Turn off that phone, set it aside, and really engage with our session together today. Either way, I hope that you come out of this opportunity with some new understandings or maybe some ahas about some previous information to help you increase your confidence in dealing with these students' self-regulations and their overall behaviors. I want to pause here on this quote from Brene Brown. Joy collected over time fuels resilience, ensuring that we'll have reservoirs of emotional strength when hard things do happen. Brown's message highlights the importance of joy and positivity in building resilience. For us, and especially for our students, resilience isn't just a reaction to hardship, it's something we build gradually, through positive experiences and moments of joy. When students experience joy regularly, they are more likely to have the inner strength to handle challenges. This emotional reservoir equips them to bounce back from difficult situations. As we move through this session, let's remember that joy isn't a luxury, it's essential to emotional well-being. Our work in helping students build resilience includes not only supporting them in tough times, but also helping them find joy and positivity in everyday moments. So let's start here. What is happening with student behaviors? As Dr. J.P. Chan points out, children love routines, and breaking routine is probably one of the most challenging things any child faces, let alone a full family unit. This disruption in routine, especially in recent years, has had a big impact on students' behaviors. When routines are disrupted, children often feel a sense of insecurity. This can lead to resistance and anxiety as they struggle to regain control or feel safe in their environment. Many of us may have noticed these shifts in behavior firsthand. We are seeing things such as increased fights, rises in disruptive behaviors, more arguing and aggressive behaviors, uncommon responses, and avoidance behaviors. It's important for us to understand that these behaviors aren't just acting out, they're often signals of deeper anxiety and an attempt to navigate disruptive routines. As educators, recognizing these signs can help us approach students with empathy and develop strategies to support them through these challenging transitions. So why are we seeing such an increase in student behaviors? I'm going to encourage you to pause your video here and take a look at this optional video. This video highlights why it is that students, and really all of us, sometimes lose control. The video is around 7 minutes long, and it dives into the factors that contribute to loss of control. It explains some of the underlying emotional and physiological responses that can trigger outbursts or make it difficult for students to self-regulate. Watching this video can give us a deeper understanding of the why behind these behaviors, which is essential for responding effectively and helping students build skills to manage their emotions. If we're ready, let's go ahead and view the video. I'll be waiting when you get back, and we'll continue on with our topic. Welcome back. You've either chosen to watch the optional video and are now returning to this session, or you're ready to continue on with the information we've been covering thus far. If you chose to watch the optional video, you learned a little bit about the amygdala hijacking. And we're going to take a look at this concept, which helps explain why students sometimes lose control in intense emotional moments. The amygdala is a part of the brain that processes emotions, especially fear and threat responses. When students encounter something that feels threatening, whether it's social pressure, academic stress, or a challenging situation, the amygdala can take over, initiating what we call an amygdala hijack. In this state, the brain essentially shifts into fight, flight, or freeze mode, and rational thinking gets put on hold. When this happens, students may act out in ways that seem disproportionate to the situation. For example, they might lash out, become argumentative, or completely shut down. They're not necessarily choosing these reactions. Rather, their brain is prioritizing immediate safety over reasoning. Understanding amygdala hijacking reminds us that in these moments, students are always in control. Understanding amygdala hijacking reminds us that in these moments, students aren't always in control. Our job is to help them feel safe and support them in returning to a calmer, more rational state so they can make better decisions. By identifying when a student may be experiencing an amygdala hijack, we can approach them with empathy and the tools to co-regulate effectively. Next, we're going to talk about ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, which can have a lasting impact on students' emotional and behavioral development. Adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, refer to highly stressful or traumatic events that happen during childhood. These experiences are grouped into three main types, which you can see in the graphic provided. They include abuse, which may be physical, emotional, or sexual; neglect, which can be physical or emotional; or household dysfunction, such as substance abuse, mental illness, or incarceration. Children who are experiencing one or more ACEs are at a higher risk for a range of issues, from difficulty regulating emotions to long-term mental and physical challenges. These experiences affect brain development, often making it harder for students to focus, self-regulate, and engage in positive social interactions. As educators, being aware of ACEs is essential. It doesn't mean we need to know every detail of a student's background, but it does remind us to approach challenging behaviors with empathy and understanding that these may be rooted in past trauma. Throughout this session, we'll talk about ways to support students who may have experienced ACEs, particularly by creating safe, predictable environments that can help them to build resilience. Now let's take a look at the prevalence of ACEs and why this topic is so critical for us as educators. ACEs are far more common than many realize. According to Active Healthcare, studies show that approximately 1 in 4 children has experienced at least one type of ACE, and some children experience multiple types of trauma. This means that in any classroom, there's a high likelihood that we have students who are impacted by these experiences. The impact of ACEs extends beyond childhood trauma and can affect mental health, academic performance, and even physical health outcomes in adulthood. Understanding how prevalent ACEs are can help us approach behavior not as willful defiance or misbehavior, but rather as a possible sign of underlying stress or trauma. As educators, we're in a unique position to help break the cycle by creating environments that offer stability, safety, and emotional support. We can help students build resilience and cope with the effects of past trauma. So as we move forward in this session, keep in mind that addressing ACEs isn't just about dealing with behaviors. It's about addressing underlying needs and fostering a healing environment. Now let's make a quick shift to focus on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now let's shift our focus to the impact the COVID-19 pandemic has had on students, particularly in terms of their emotional well-being and behavior. The pandemic disrupted not only students' academic routines, but also their social interactions, emotional development, and overall sense of stability. For many students, the isolation, uncertainty, and changes to their daily lives created significant challenges. Some of the key impacts we've seen include social isolation, increased anxiety, difficulty with structure, regression in emotional intelligence, It's important to recognize that the impact of COVID-19 may continue to affect students long after the immediate disruptions are over. As educators, understanding these effects can guide how we approach student behavior, knowing that some of these challenges stem from years of heightened stress and uncertainty. As we move forward, we'll explore strategies to help support these students and begin the process of emotional recovery and growth. This comic is a great illustration of what we sometimes see in our classrooms. Students carrying past trauma are straddled with bad news, with things like the pandemic and additional stress, and some minor inconvenience comes up, tripping them along the way. We sometimes perceive this as overreacting, not understanding the burdens that those students may be carrying at that time. Now let's dive into trauma-informed practices. Understanding trauma and its impact on students is key to providing the best support for them. The different parts of this section will help us to understand the broader picture of how trauma affects students and how we as educators can respond effectively. Part 1 will be the rediscovery of trauma. Trauma is a term that's been around for a long time, but we're only recently discovering its full impact, especially in the context of childhood. For many years, trauma was often seen as something rare or extreme. However, we now know that trauma is much more common and can take many forms, including neglect, abuse, and environmental stressors. Recognizing trauma as a widespread issue is the first step toward addressing it effectively. In part 2, This is Your Brain on Trauma, we're going to look at when trauma occurs. It doesn't just affect a child emotionally, it impacts their brain development as well. Trauma can change how the brain functions, particularly the areas responsible for learning, memory, and emotional regulation. This means that students who've experienced trauma may have difficulties with concentration, impulse control, and forming relationships. As educators, understanding these changes helps us to be more patient and responsive to students' needs. In part 3, The Minds of Children, we're going to look at how children process trauma differently than adults. Their brains are still developing, and as such, they may lack the language or coping mechanisms to express their emotions. This can manifest in behaviors such as aggression, withdrawal, or anxiety. As adults, we need to be mindful of how trauma affects their capacity to regulate emotions, engage in learning, and develop healthy relationships. And finally, in part 4, we're going to look at the imprint of trauma. Trauma doesn't simply disappear, it leaves an imprint. The experiences children have can shape their behavior, their self-esteem, and how they view the world around them. These imprints often appear in the form of emotional reactions, physical symptoms, or behavioral challenges. Understanding this imprint helps us recognize that a child's behavior is often a response to past experiences rather than intentional misbehavior. Understanding these foundational principles of trauma is critical to creating a safe, supportive environment for students who have experienced trauma. Our responses to their behavior needs to be rooted in compassion and an understanding that their actions are often a result of past experiences, not a reflection of who they are or their ability to learn. This powerful quote by trauma expert Bessel van der Kolk emphasizes the importance of acknowledging our emotions and experiences before we can begin to heal. In the context of trauma, this is particularly relevant for both students and educators. When students experience trauma, they often bury their emotions or disconnect from their feelings as a coping mechanism. For them to heal and begin the process of emotional regulation, they must first be able to recognize and process their feelings. This takes a tremendous amount of courage, especially for children who may not have the vocabulary or understanding to express what they've been through. As educators, we must create safe environments where students feel comfortable enough to confront their emotions, even if that means they first have to work through the difficult feelings. Only by knowing what we know and feeling what we feel can we begin the process of self-regulation and emotional growth. This quote reminds us of the importance of patience and understanding as we work with students who have experienced trauma. Healing isn't an immediate process. It requires acknowledging difficult emotions and recognizing the bravery it takes to face these emotions. Our role is to support them in that process with empathy and care. So what do accelerated behaviors look like in a classroom? Accelerated behaviors are often reactions to underlying emotional or physiological stress. Accelerated behaviors are often reactions to underlying emotional or psychological stress. These behaviors can manifest as an intensified version of typical classroom disruptions and can be indicators that a student is struggling with something beyond just the academic content. We've been discussing how accelerated behaviors can show up in the classroom, but it's also helpful to understand the escalation process itself. The 7 phases of escalation can give us an understanding of how students move through emotional states and how we can intervene effectively at each stage. We'll now focus on the last 3 phases of this cycle, starting with phase 5, peak. The peak of escalation is the crisis point. This is when the student's behavior is most intense, whether it's an outburst of anger, an emotional breakdown, or a total shutdown. During this phase, it can feel difficult to reason with the student because their emotional state is overwhelming and their ability to think logically or regulate their emotions is severely impaired. It's essential to remain calm and avoid reacting impulsively, as the student's behavior is not always in their conscious control at this point. The student may then move to phase 6, de-escalation. After reaching the peak, students will eventually begin to calm down, entering the de-escalation phase. This phase is characterized by a decrease in emotional intensity. The student may start to regain some self-control, and their physical symptoms of stress may start to subside. During de-escalation, it's important to offer calm, non-threatening support and allow the student time to regain composure. This is an ideal moment for teachers to provide clear, calm instructions and to guide the student back toward a more regulated state. Finally, we see recovery, or phase 7. The recovery phase is when the student is fully returning to a calm state. In this phase, the student is more likely to engage in reflective conversation and can process what happened. This is a critical time for us as educators to offer support and discuss the behavior in a constructive way, ideally when the student is ready. The goal here is to help the student reflect on their actions, discuss triggers or underlying reasons, and provide guidance on how they can manage their emotions in the future. It's important to rebuild trust and provide positive reinforcement, while also addressing any underlying needs or concerns that contributed to the escalation. We also want to consider the earlier phases of the escalation cycle. Students will generally begin in the calm phase. This is the baseline state where the student is regulated and can engage productively in class. Understanding this phase allows us to set up positive routines and emotional supports for the student. In the trigger phase, this marks the beginning of emotional dysregulation, often due to an external event or frustration. It's important to recognize when the student is beginning to move into this stage so that we can intervene early. In stage 3, we see agitation. Here, students become visibly agitated. They might show physical signs of stress such as fidgeting, increased talking, or a short temper. Early intervention can help prevent the escalation from becoming a larger issue. And finally, in phase 4, we see acceleration. This phase is characterized by increased emotional intensity. The student might escalate from irritation to frustration, and if unaddressed, could move into peak escalation. Recognizing acceleration allows us to take proactive steps to de-escalate before the situation becomes a crisis. Understanding these phases is essential for managing behavior in the classroom effectively. By identifying where a student is in the escalation cycle, we can tailor our response appropriately, whether it's by providing a calming strategy, offering support, or helping them to reflect on what happened after the fact. Reviewing each of these stages, we can find some additional detail about what it means to be in each of these 7 phases. In phase 1, the calm phase, the key is to maintain a structured, supportive environment and actively engage students in meaningful learning experiences by reinforcing calm behaviors and providing a positive classroom climate. We can help students remain in the calm phase as much as possible. In the calm phase, students are typically cooperative. They're willing to accept corrective feedback and follow direction. They're able to ignore distractions and are generally on task. Some of the key strategies to maintaining that calm environment include appropriate classroom structure, high-quality instruction, and managing attention. We also want to make sure that we are teaching students appropriate behavior as part of our instructional routine. In phase 2, the trigger phase, it's crucial to be attuned to the early signs of emotional dysregulation and to offer proactive, supportive strategies to help the student regain control before things escalate. This phase provides an opportunity for early intervention to prevent further escalation. In the trigger phase, students begin to struggle with unresolved problems. They might experience conflicts or failures. They might feel pressure. They might have ineffective problem solving, but they still will generally remain on task. Some major strategies to assist us in the trigger phase are utilizing formal programs or services, such as curriculum, interventions, and counseling, pre-corrective actions to anticipate and intervene, and to address non-school triggers, such as parent partnerships or other wraparound services. In phase 3, the agitation phase, the focus should be on helping the student regulate their emotions before they escalate further. By using empathy, offering movement or choice, and reducing anxiety, we can support the student in navigating the challenging phase and returning to a more productive state. During this phase, we begin to see the student be off task. In the agitation phase, the focus should be on helping the students regulate their emotions before they escalate further. By using empathy, offering movement or choice, and reducing anxiety, we can support the student in navigating this challenging phase and returning to a more productive state. In this phase, we begin to see the student off task. They start to question authority and may be arguing. They could be bothering others or socially withdrawing. Some strategies to support our students when they're in the agitation phase is to focus on the reduction of that anxiety. Act before they escalate. Utilize empathy. Offer opportunities for movement, give them space, and allow for choice. In phase 4, the acceleration phase, this is one of the most challenging, as it involves a student who has reached a heightened emotional state and is acting out in more aggressive or disruptive ways. The key strategies are to manage the environment, stay calm, and approach the student with empathy and respect to prevent further escalation into crisis behavior. In this phase, the student is going to be questioning or arguing. They may be making threats. They're going to be non-compliant and demonstrating defiance. They may be provoking others and actively violating the rules. Some strategies to support during the acceleration phase include the removal of triggers, avoiding acceleration prompts, maintaining calm, using respect, and fostering non-threatening approaches. How we respond to a student in the acceleration phase can make all of the difference as to whether or not we can return them to a more calm state or if we're going to further accelerate their behaviors. In the peak phase, the primary focus must be safety and immediate crisis management. It's crucial to remain calm, assess the situation, and implement appropriate strategies to prevent harm while preparing for a functional assessment to guide future responses. In the peak phase, the student is likely demonstrating out-of-control behavior. They may be running, screaming, they may be physically aggressive or having a severe tantrum. We often see destruction of property and at times even self-harm. Some strategies to manage the peak phase include focusing on safety, implementing crisis management strategies, assessing the risk, and conducting a functional assessment. In phase 6, the de-escalation phase, it's all about providing the student with time and space to regain control and calm their emotions. It is essential to ensure safety, avoid assigning blame, and find the right time to engage in a productive conversation about the behavior. Monitoring for signs of re-escalation is key to preventing another crisis. In the de-escalation phase, the student has behavior that shows a lack of focus. They're often confused or withdrawn. They deny their actions and will often blame others. Some important strategies during the de-escalation phase include the evaluation of health and safety, allowing time and space for calming down, avoiding blame, finding appropriate time to debrief, and monitoring for re-escalation. Finally, in stage 7, the recovery phase, the student may desire busy work. They will often have a reluctance to interact. They will see subdued behavior, and they may develop even defensive behavior or want to sleep. This is because of the extreme amount of emotional energy that has been discharged during these 7 phases. Some strategies to assist students in recovery includes focusing on returning to normal activities, positively reinforcing displays of appropriate behavior, following through with consequences, and rehearsing problem solving for future use. Now let's look at what we can do about it. One of the key elements here is to teach students self-regulation. And self-regulation refers to the ability to control one's emotions, thoughts, and behaviors in the face of external demands. To achieve a goal, it is critical for academic success, emotional well-being, and social interactions. Why is self-regulation important? Because it teaches students emotional control, goal achievement, and improved social interactions. Some tips for self-regulation include taking deep breaths, drinking water, counting to 10, speaking to a teacher or counselor, or moving away from anyone who might be distracting. Co-regulation can be a great additional support to achieve self-regulation. Co-regulation is the process by which adults and children work together to manage emotions and behaviors in real time. This is especially important for students who are still developing their self-regulation skills. Co-regulation provides external support to help students navigate their emotional responses and bring themselves back to a state of calm and focus. This quote highlights the foundational role that the care and consistency plays in building trust. For students, especially those who may have experienced trauma or adversity, feeling safe and supported is critical to their emotional development and ability to self-regulate. Safety is the bedrock for all other emotional and behaviors to happen. Let's pause for a moment and look at this quote. When we're in the presence of someone who cares about us, we not only feel safe, we begin to build trust, especially when these experiences are repeated over and over again with the same person. This quote highlights the importance of the foundational role that care and consistency play in building trust. For students, especially those who may have experienced trauma or adversity, feeling safe and supported is critical to their emotional development and ability to self-regulate. Safety is the bedrock for all other emotional and behavioral work to happen. When students feel physically and emotionally safe, they are more open to the learning process, problem solving, and taking risks necessary for growth. Let's move on and discuss some self and co-regulation techniques that can be helpful to us in our classroom environment. Let's start with managing our own stress. Why is this important? Well, students who feel supported are more likely to take risks and try new coping strategies. When students are encouraged, they learn to trust themselves and their ability to manage their emotions. To implement this approach, offer praise for small successes, acknowledge their efforts, and emphasize that it's okay to make mistakes as part of the learning process. Your encouragement can motivate them to keep practicing their self-regulation techniques. Catch students when they're in control. Help them understand that appropriate behaviors are something that you want to see. Offer them that positive praise. But then coach them when they're out of control. Help them understand that your desire is to help them with their behaviors so that they might be able to regulate them on their own. It's also important to develop realistic expectations. Students may not be able to achieve some of the high thresholds that are put in front of them. Keeping those expectations realistic are essential. Be supportive and encouraging. Provide structure and consistency, and help them develop a toolbox of these important strategies. Let's take a deeper look at each of these. In tip number 1, managing our own stress. Let's take a deeper look at each of these strategies. Tip number 1, manage your own stress. Get your own needs met so that you can support students and be a positive role model. Tip number 2, keep calm. Stay calm, show empathy, help them become self-aware, and guide them through sensory experiences and calming strategies. Tip 3, catch them in control. If you catch a student self-soothing or making positive choices, even when they are upset, make sure to compliment them. Tip 4, coach them when they are out of control. Use every emotion and reaction as a learning opportunity. Tip 5, develop realistic expectations. Assess children's skills to determine whether they need support. Tip 6, be supportive and encouraging. Show genuine interest and engage them as a coach and mentor. Tip 7, provide structure and consistency. Let children know what to expect and what is expected of them, such as routines, clear rules, and proactive planning. Tip 8, teach children about their brains and emotions. Help them understand the role of the downstairs brain in their stress response, as well as the upstairs brain in their self-regulation. Tip 9, teach and enhance self-awareness. Include self-awareness strategies in your classroom. Helping kids understand where they are at and how they're feeling, and being able to label and understand those feelings can be powerful tools. And finally, tip 10, help them develop a toolbox of strategies. Encourage students to develop strategies to calm themselves. Some tips for your emotional toolbox include a mental break, a physical break, a sensory experience, or a grounding activity. A mental break might include reading a favorite book, listening to music, coloring, playing a game, watching a video or movie. A physical break might include dance, sports activity, taking a walk, doing stretches, yoga, or meditation. A great sensory experience might include a scavenger hunt, use of Play-Doh or a sensory bin, fingerprinting, listening to music, blowing bubbles. And a grounding activity might look like deep breathing, such as square breathing, slow counting, visual imagery, making a list, or using an anchoring phrase. Tool 5, positive self-talk. Speak to yourself in a way that's encouraging and uplifting. Post positive affirmations and change negative words to positive. Let's take an opportunity here to practice. As we wrap up our time here together, let's take an opportunity to practice. Let's look at this situation together. Students are sitting in pods of 4. At one table, one of the more fidgety students is pestering one of the other students at the table. They're taking things off her desk, staring at her paper, and you've warned the student to stop, but the pestering has not lessened. What do you do? Feel free to pause the video for a moment and jot down some notes. What are some of the responses that you've learned in our time together in this session that might help support this student and their classmates? Here are some important steps to address the situation. First of all, assess the situation. Quickly evaluate the impact of the behavior on the other students in the group. Is the other student visibly upset? Are others around the student being distracted or effective? Consider whether the fidgety student is acting out due to anxiety, boredom, or difficulty focusing. Use some positive reinforcement with that fidgety student. You might have brought up some of the importances of providing clear, immediate consequences, such as giving a direct, clear reminder of your expectations for the classroom. If the student continues to disrupt, explain the consequences in a calm, non-punitive way, such as, if this continues, I'll need to ask you to move to a different location so that you can focus better. Make sure you're redirecting the fidgety student, engaging the rest of the group, and after the incident, consider that once the situation is diffused, having a brief one-on-one conversation with the fidgety student to discuss the behavior. Avoid shaming, instead ask them to reflect on what happened. I noticed you were having a hard time staying focused. What do you think might help you focus better in the future? And if needed, follow up later with a more formal check-in, such as a conversation with the student's parents or counselor. Let's take a look at a second situation. In this situation, the second graders in Miss Murphy's class are gathered together on the rug for a math lesson. As Miss Murphy begins to teach, Austin just cannot seem to get focused. He begins drumming his pencil on the floor loudly and wiggling his body around. Then he starts calling out random words. Soon, several other students grow distracted by Austin, and Nick is so frustrated that he throws a pencil at Austin's head. Go ahead and pause the video here and jot down some notes about how you might respond to this specific situation. When you're ready, click play to resume. What were some of your thoughts about this specific situation? Did you think about how you would immediately address the safety issue by de-escalating Nick's behavior? What did you think about possibly redirecting Austin's behavior? What were some of the steps you took to re-engage the class? How did you go about addressing Nick's frustration? What might it have looked like to teach and reinforce the expected behavior? And what did your follow-up look like with both of the students involved in this situation, as well as the class as a whole? Let's do one more before we conclude our time together. In this situation, we are dealing with a student named Deshaun, who's a 16-year-old ninth grade student who's being suspended for 5 days for repeated violation of school rules. Most serious is a recent confrontation with his fourth period algebra teacher. Deshaun was involved in a verbal argument in class and dropped the F-bomb on his teacher. Pause the video now and consider taking some notes on how you would respond to this specific situation. When you're ready, click play to resume. Welcome back. What was your immediate response to this situation? Did you consider how you would ensure Deshaun's safety and emotional state? Before addressing the behavior, think about whether or not Deshaun is calm enough to have a productive conversation. Is he still in a heightened emotional state? Does he need time to cool off before engaging in a discussion? What were some of your initial communications? How did you meet with Deshaun? Did you sit down with him privately to discuss the situation? Approach the conversation calmly and respectfully without placing blame? You might have said something like, Deshaun, I understand you've been having a hard time in class, and the situation with your teacher got out of hand. I want to hear what happened from your perspective. What do the restorative practices look like for Deshaun? How does he make it right with this teacher in this situation? What kind of supports did you provide for some of the underlying issues with this student? How might you have collaborated with the teacher and reinforced future expectations and behaviors? What does the follow-up look like for Deshaun to ensure that this is an isolated incident? I want to close by asking you to think about our time together and the topics we've covered. Take a moment to reflect on the following. What did you learn today that will help you in handling situations where you might feel upset or overwhelmed? What strategies or tools do you feel most confident in using when you need to stay calm or help others stay calm? What's one thing you want to focus on improving as you practice self-regulation and co-regulation? And how will you apply what you've learned to better manage your emotions and behaviors moving forward? How will this ultimately support your students and your classroom? Again, I want to thank you for taking the time to join me for this session. I hope you've learned some great tips and tricks that will help you be even more successful in your classroom.